Hey everyone, welcome to a fantastic new edition of our training. As you can tell, I'm not with John this week. I'm here with Roberto from, hey Nathaniel, how you going? From our sibling union in Quebec, a name of which I cannot pronounce.
Oh, you're pretty good. Quebec, we're the second biggest province in Canada. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Hi Janet, hi John, how you going? This will go a little bit different than normal, but I thought we might play something a little bit, something fun to begin with. Do people remember the good old emoji challenge? Hey Kay, how you going? I think more people got fun than normal, which is good. So Roberto, what is one thing what
do I like?
Yeah.
I like your winters.
Oh.
I'm from Canada. Our last meeting that we held was in November, December in Canada, and that's our winters. And what a difference night and day, our winters to yours. Walking outside in Australia in your winters when it's 16, 18 degrees, beautiful. Us, our winters are more like minus 15, minus 20, cold, snowy, lots of snow, lots of cold, lots of ice. So I'm having a beautiful time enjoying Australia, the few hours I got to walk outside.
Good. Yeah, I can't imagine what minus 15 would be like.
It's brutal. It's extremely brutal. You leave work in the morning and it's pitch dark, and you come home at night, it's pitch dark. And picture starting your car when it's minus 30 degrees. You feel for those engines. Luckily, they're well built and they're used to those colds.
Fair enough. Hey Kay, hey Aaron, how you going?
Hi guys.
So what makes you laugh?
Well, what makes me laugh is animals. I enjoy animals. My kids make me laugh as well.
What's your favorite animal?
A dog.
Oh, fantastic. Have you got any?
Yes, I have a little Bichon dog.
Ah, that sounds incredible.
And I'm a kind of a workaholic, so when I get home late at night, oftentimes my kids are sleeping, everybody's sleeping at home. Luckily, I have this dog, so whether I get home at midnight or at 10 or at 2 in the morning, she's always in a good mood, happy to see me. And same thing when I get up in the morning, everybody's sleeping, and luckily she's there to greet me.
Good. Oh, what kind of dog do you have, Aaron? And hey, Nadia, how you going? Okay, so what's next? What makes you go, wow?
Wow. Wow. Well, I must say once again, it's walking around your streets. I got here about 2 days ago, so I got to explore a little, walking in your streets, and Darlington Harbor was beautiful. I walked by Bondi Beach, so that was wow to me. Thinking in the winter I was able to walk on the sand, and actually saw people surfing without a wetsuit. So that was incredible. Yeah. I can't imagine. It seemed cold to me, but to be in the water without a wetsuit, surfing, incredible. So wow to me.
Yeah, it's been good weather recently too, which is, you've been lucky.
Awesome.
So what makes you sad?
Sad, I combine sad and angry. Difficulties experienced by our members, working conditions. What we have, especially in the last few months and the last few years, we're experiencing more and more forced overtime. So when I have some single parents, single mothers that work hard, that have finished an 8-hour shift, thinking that they're going home, they got to care for their loved ones, care for their families, care for their children's, prepare meals and do homework with these kids. And certain employers take advantage of them and force them to do an additional shift. So that's totally unacceptable. And I have sadness, and then it becomes anger.
No, that's fair enough. And I guess it's the same issues that many of our members are feeling.
Exactly, like the difficulties we're encountering with the healthcare system, be here in Australia that I'm learning about, but also in Canada, and whether you're in North America, in Europe, in South America, in Australia, we share common difficulties. So it's important that we unite our forces and we speak with one voice, and we're all here for working conditions, for the defense of the working conditions of the healthcare professionals, nurses, and midwives, and we're here ultimately to promote good quality care for the population worldwide.
That's great to hear. So now it's almost 5. I think we've got quite a few more people on, which is good. So Roberto, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role and your organization in Quebec?
Well, once again, for the people that just joined, greetings from Canada, greetings from FIQ. Thus, our organization is FIC. I'm a nurse clinician who graduated from McGill University. However, now I'm on executive officer. Thus, I'm treasurer of our federation, and I'm also responsible in terms of national collective bargaining and social security. I've been within FIQ since 2011. So when I was elected, I was one of the youngest elected officials of FIQ. And now a few years later, thus 7 years later, I'm not the youngest in terms of age anymore. However, I'm the eldest in terms of experience as an officer. So you could see that there's been a lot of change within our organization in the last few years in terms of our elected officers.
Alrighty. And so
in terms of FIC, just to give you a little more information, we represent 75,000 healthcare professionals. Thus, we're 75,000 members strong. And a majority are registered nurses. That's 55,000 are registered nurses. We have about 17,000 licensed practical nurses. We have about 3,000 respiratory therapists and also a handful of clinical perfusionists. Quebec is the second largest province in Canada. Thus, we have a population of 8.4 million inhabitants in Quebec. We have an incredible healthcare system. I'm not embarrassed to say it. We feel that we have one of the best healthcare system that is a universal healthcare system that is publicly funded. However, we don't take it for granted. We know the risk of privatization, like we're seeing worldwide, is fast approaching as governments are trying to find solutions to the difficulties in terms of funding, in terms of staffing, in terms of the growth of the needs of the population, be it in terms of chronic illnesses, be it in terms of the growth of the population. There's more and more elderlies that we got to care for.
And John's just said that 75,000 is a big union.
Exactly, and we're quite proud of it. In our province, that's the province of 8.4 million, we're the largest labor organization and the largest feminine labor organization, in which 90% of our healthcare professionals, thus our members, are women. So all the decisions we take, all the orientations we take are always geared in terms of women. So it's a concern that we have at all levels of our structure. We also have, in terms of budget, for the healthcare system, that's combined with social services, is $38.5 billion for the current year. And it's the first time that over 50% of the provincial budget has been or will be going to a healthcare system. Wow. So it's a huge concern for the government in place, where they feel that there's a loss of control in terms of budgeting, because it's the first time that it's surpassed 50%. Thus, we know there's a risk of reductions, and we've encountered this in the last few years. There's been $1.3 billion of cuts in the healthcare system, and this unfortunately was done on the back of workers. So now that our economy is better, as being responsible for collective bargaining, it's quite clear that in the next round of negotiations, bargaining, we need to improve the working conditions of our members, and we're going to do it with regards to safe care staffing ratios.
Oh, good. So on that note, how has the struggle been for ratios, and what has been your the story and the plan for you to achieve ratios in Quebec?
Well, what Global Nurses United has allowed us to put together was the sharing and the dialogue through our sister unions and our affiliated unions, be it in across Canada, be it in North America with Nurses National United, who have an expertise, who have led a major fight with regards to ratios in California. This is United States, but also in terms of Australia, be it in terms of the Victoria branch or New South Wales. You've developed expertise in terms of this field. So being part of Global Nurses United, we were able to share with the fights that you guys have led in this country and in other countries where we're trying to implement in our province. So in the last few years, in our last round of bargaining, thus for our 2016-2020 collective bargaining, the agreement we've reached is we put in place a committee at the national level with our federation and also with the government, where we set up a committee to begin to evaluate the feasibility and the relevance of ratios. So that was a first step. We know it was a very minor step, and our expectation, in all honesty, and I've said it to our members, I've said it to our board, I'm saying it here today, we were expecting to put in place 3 pilot projects within the time frame of our collective agreement, which ended in 2020. However, when I look at where we are today, we've made huge strides versus these 3 pilot projects. And it's a lot with in terms of our strategies in place in terms of organization. And I'll bring it in terms of 3 major elements. Thus, in terms of preparation, we knew that we wanted to lead this fight once and for all. We didn't know when we'd lead this fight, so we got prepared. We worked with our members. In the last few years, we've changed our union practices. We're practicing a social unionism movement union in terms of we're much closer with our members than we ever were. We're also very close with the population. So although 98% of our work is in French, so excuse my English as well, although I'm bilingual, 98% of my work in my organization is in French, so I might have some difficulties. And once again, I excuse myself because I'll do my interventions in French and I work in French, I write in French. However, I'm also capable in English. Thus, I might have some difficulties in the terminology. So we brought in this new union movement in our federation where we're much closer with the baseline. And rather than simply denouncing everything, we brought in a model where we bring concrete actions. So we're more in terms of a proposal movement organization. And one of the first proposals that we brought in place in 2014 was to set up, and that was a first in our province, set up nursing clinics. Unfortunately, we've got a strong medical model in our province where it's there's a lot of power and a lot of funding that goes to the doctors in our province. So we tried to counteract this model by putting in place a nursing model where we set up our own nursing model clinics, which we funded. We funded 100% via our federation. And our goal was clear, is to demonstrate these nursing model clinics with research base. So we had 2 major universities over an 18-month to 22-month period clearly demonstrate all the benefits to the populations and ultimately the cost saving to the government. And eventually we were able to demonstrate the advantages of having nursing model clinics. And eventually they were taken on by the public sector. So that was one of our first fights. And our second fight is with regards to ratios. So like I said before, we set up a committee at the national level with the government. However, what changed is, and I said it before, we were hoping for 3 pilot projects over a given period of 3-4 months. However, we were ready. We were ready to lead this fight, be it in terms of advertisement, be it in terms of slogans, being in terms of banners. However, what changed was January 2018. So in January 2018, once again, we had a very cold winter. I said it before, our winters could be drastic, and this winter was colder than usual. We had sub-30-degree weather, lots of snow, lots of rain as well, lots of ice. So obviously, with the weather, we had the impact in terms of the healthcare system. We had lots of patients that would adventure outside, and the elderly would have falls. So we had injuries. So it led to an overcrowding in terms of the ERs, long wait times in terms of the ER, and also in terms of surgeries. And then that led to overcrowding in terms of our med surgical wards. At the same time, we had a large, the flu season. So our flu season is always in terms of January, February. Once again, we had a strong flu season, which led to an influx of patients in hospitals, patients that were at risk in terms of immune systems and whatnot. And then what changed is one morning where we had a nurse, Emilie Ricard, a junior nurse, 24 years old, who had just come back from a maternity leave, and she had experienced 3 forced overtime in the last 2 weeks. She worked in a long-term care facility, and one morning she just got home and she posted on social media what she felt was going on. She was disappointed in her profession. It was an outcry where she felt that her employer was simply not caring for the workers. It was a cry for help. It was a distress of the healthcare system, where for her, she was questioning. She was 24 years old, only a few years within the profession, and she was questioning that she was dying within, the healthcare system was dying, and she was questioning her role within as a nurse, as a registered nurse, that she was no longer able to care for the patients, provide the quality care. She felt that she was putting even patients at risk. And this post went viral. It went viral within a number of days. Thousands and tens of thousands and 50,000 people had acknowledged this post, which obviously the media acknowledged this post as well. On a daily basis, there was coverage of the situation that we were experiencing in our province, the outcry of nurses. So she was the first, and afterwards, we've never had as many nurses and of all ages denounce their working conditions. So although we had tools in place, we had an online form where nurses could denounce situations that were putting their patients at risk, that were putting themselves at risk as registered nurses. The tools were available. Yes, they were being used occasionally, but once this post went viral, we had hundreds of nurses on a daily basis denouncing their working conditions. So faced with these facts, it was quite clear that the government had to take action. He was quite irritated as a healthcare minister. So we sat down with him, and quickly, the only solution that we put forward was to set up permanent safe care ratios once and for all in the province of Quebec, like we've seen in Australia, like we've seen in certain states of United States of America. So what I had said before, we were hoping of having 3 pilot projects over a number of years. Within a few months, we set up projects not only on medical units, surgical units, long-term cares. We're going to have projects in terms of ER, home care as well, also in terms of privately long-term care institutions that are publicly funded, and respiratory therapies. So that's the major difference, that over a given period of a few weeks, because of this situation that happened in the winter, we were able to set up. So what I said before, the committee at the national level, we're supposed to look at the feasibility and the relevance of having ratios. Right now, the committee is working on permanent implementation of ratios.
Yeah. And is that, John's asking if that is going through as part of your legislation or part of your collective agreement? Right
now, it's part of our collective agreement, but what we've learned in terms of California and as well as Australia, be it in terms of Victoria branch and New South Wales, it's quite clear. Our goal is we're going to work at it in terms of collective agreement, but ultimately we want it at the legislation area in order to ensure permanent safe ratios. And we know that governments come and go, governments change. So the only way to ensure safe care, safe ratios, is for it to be embedded in the law.
Fair enough. And hi, Craig and Rebecca, who've just jumped on. Obviously, you're here with Global Nurses United.
Correct.
What is it that Global Nurses United do?
So Global Nurses United is an organization that came about in 2013. We know there's some international organizations, I won't mention the names, that represent large numbers of unions, be it in the public sector or elsewhere, be it in terms of industrial unions. However, we felt, and there was a vision in 2013, that nurses across the country, across globally, had to put together their difficulties. We know that in terms of neoliberalism, it's experienced everywhere. We know that austerity, we know that cuts in the healthcare system. It's the easiest way for governments to come up with quick cuts in a short-term period of time because of the large investments in the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to unite our voice, and that's where we came about by creating a soft structure, Global Nurses United. So it's the only international organization that represent nurses across the globe. So we're quite proud of it. So today we represent over 1 million nurses across the world. So it represents 22 countries with 25 unions, and we're the only international organization at that level. And we know that the reality is the difficulties that are experienced in Australia, we're experiencing them in Canada, in Latin America, in Israel, in the United States. So we have to speak together, one common voice for the well-being of the healthcare professionals, for the nurses, the midwives, and also for the well-being of the populations. So that's our priority. But we also have major concerns, major preoccupations in terms of the planet, the safeguard of planet, the environment. We're looking also in terms of workplace violence. When there's cuts in the healthcare system, when there's a shortage of staff, when there's work overload, unfortunately, oftentimes there's also an increase in work violence, and it's totally unacceptable. And we have to change this situation once and for all.
Hey Heather, how you going? So just some questions from our audience. So Craig said, it's terrible that it must get to breaking point where our young nurses question the profession before the government listens. And that's so true, particularly with the story that you raised, which then leads to Kay's question of how do management make nurses stay? And what do you think needs to change so that nurses aren't being burnt out of the profession and want to go back to work every day?
Well, essentially, it's a combined effort of management, the government, and also unions and federations. So we'll do it in terms of collective bargaining to ensure that they have adequate working conditions. Salaries are an issue. However, on a daily basis, our nurses are telling us it's no longer a question of money. Don't give us more money. We need more nurses, thus safe staffing ratios, where by increasing the number of nurses, we reduce the ratios of patients in the different work centers. Like I said, nurses have to have the sufficient time to provide adequate care to the population worldwide. And unfortunately, it's not normal that nurses, in our case, were getting home after an 8-hour shift, and even worse if there was forced overtime where they had to do a 16-hour shift, and they would question themselves, did I have time to do everything that I had to do? And unfortunately, they didn't. So they had to prioritize, and they felt guilt. There was a large level of insatisfaction. And unfortunately, yes, we had nurses questioning leaving the profession. So with all this energy of increasing ratios, ultimately there'll be thousands and tens of thousands of additional nurses within the profession. And ultimately, people will be able to enjoy what they used to know in terms of the nursing profession.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of questions here, which I lumped into one. How did you sell the message of being involved to young nurses who fear being involved in union activity? And what actions did local branch members do at a local hospital level?
Well, we set up a program, an advocacy training program, where it wasn't only put in place for our delegates at the local level, and we have about 12 to 1,300 delegates for 75,000 members. So that was the first level training in terms of advocacy with our delegates. We took it a step further where we accredited this training session for the healthcare professionals, thus for our nurses. And we had different levels of this training session, and be it accredited, recognized by universities, and us as elected officials, and also in terms of our staff, we were providing these training sessions throughout the institutions in the province. And to this day, in a short period of time, I'd say over an 18-month period of time, we had over 10,600 members, professionals that attended these training sessions. So that allowed them to put limitations in terms of their employers. So not only did they recognize the importance of being advocates as nurses for the well-being of the patients, for the well-being of the populations, they were able to better stand up in terms of their bosses or management or the employers, in terms of their capabilities, and set clear limitations in terms of them being as a nurse.
Fantastic. And so we've got two more questions. Do you have a problem with the casualization of nurses in Quebec?
Our problem with casualization, we had it, I'd say, about 10 years ago. But in our last round of bargaining, I'd say 2010 and 2015, we were able to ensure that approximately 90% to 95% of our staff within the institutions, be it in home care, be it in acute care, had to obtain permanent positions. And right now we're struggling in the last round of bargaining is not only permanent positions, but we're talking about full-time positions. Thus, if we look at registered nurses over a few year period of time, right now 50% of our nurses have full-time positions. We're going to bring it to 62% of these nurses. We know that ultimately it's not 80 to 90%, because we have a lot of nurses, for whatever reason, want to work part-time. However, one of the issues that we have in the last few years, because of the shortage of nurses, because of the difficulties in working conditions, is private agency personnel. Thus, we're having more and more agencies set up where you're using public monies to pay a company to staff public institutions, and that's totally unacceptable. So we're fighting them in the courts, we're fighting them through the laws, and we're also denouncing it in terms of public campaigns where it's totally unacceptable. And it's funny because we have certain institutions, it's quite ironic, where they've never had one nurse being employed through a private agencies, and we have, so we're saying these are model hospitals for us. Yeah. And unfortunately, this another hospital, neighboring hospital, is having hundreds of thousands of hours on a yearly basis. It's approximately $165 to $200 million that are budgeted for these private agencies. So for us, it's quite clear we're denouncing that these employers are incompetent employers, because it's totally acceptable. Us as taxpayers, why would we pay more monies for an agency who is there for profit to staff public hospitals?
No, of course, and we agree with you. Casualization is increasingly becoming an issue here in Australia.
Unfortunately.
So finally, what message do you have for our activists in New South Wales in regards to their ongoing fight for ratios and for better working conditions?
Well, like I said before, the fight that we have, and it's taken at different levels, being different continents. However, our goal ultimately is the same. We're there for the defense of our members, defense of working conditions, and ultimately, we want to provide better care to the population. We want to improve the working conditions. So it's a common fight, and Global Nurses United together, we're leading this fight. So in terms of NSW, thank you for the invitations. Thank you for receiving us here. And you've been, your expertise has been appreciated. The fight that you led, we're leading it now. Things are going well, like I shared. However, we're taking nothing for granted. The fight is ongoing, and ultimately, these ratios have to be implemented in a law.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Roberto. And are you staying around for conference this weekend?
Yes, I'll be here at conference. And once again, greetings from Quebec, greetings from Canada, and greetings from our 75,000 healthcare professionals that we represent strong.
Alrighty. So thanks everyone for jumping on. And for those of you who will be at conference this week, we can't wait to see you then. I'll be in the campaign, so Roberto will be around.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing NSW members at your conference.
So make sure you say hi. All right. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you very much.